But tell me one thing, like you worked for like 6 years with a company as big as Google. At what point
Mm-hmm.
did you get a concussion and decide to give all that up and jump into startups?
I'll tell you this, Gautam. When I started working at Google, I was 20 years old with
Uh-huh.
no previous work experience, straight out of college. This seemed to me like an extended college or university
Uh-huh.
because my whole peer group was like of the same, sect. Like we all were like freshers out of college. Honestly speaking, when I look back now, if that happens to me today, if I get a job at Google today, I will do things much differently than I did back then,
Uh-huh.
because then I was
Of
not
course, you were
serious in
young. I
many ways.
mean, same with me, right? When I started off, when I look back and I think, damn, I should have done a few of those things very differently.
Exactly, but that's life, right? Like
But
we
that's right,
always have
right?
in
Hindsight is
hindsight everything.
2020. Hindsight is
Exactly.
2020.
But you know what? I think when I started out, firstly, it was also all too new, right? Like how does this online world work? It was not something that was deeply, ingrained in our system as Indian youth of what was that 2007. It was
Uh-huh.
not a part of our life. Smartphones did not exist in our country then, so it was not a part of my life like most of us. So I think everybody kind of struggled and picked up. And you're also young, your minds are malleable. You kind of like go with the flow. You make mistakes. So I know I made a lot of mistakes, and I'm happy I did it back then because it shaped up my career path later. I realized when I was working at Google that I think I'm a better fit in an organization where I can influence some things.
Right.
Because in a big organization, especially then I was, I think, 25 when I quit Google, too young to take big decisions and not fully exposed to the business side of things.
Hmm.
So I was very good at selling, what a business should do, like consulting basically, or looking at, okay, these are your numbers, this is your product, this is the strategy and the tools that will work for you. But I felt I'm missing out from the business perspective,
Right.
because you may give a very good consult the best that you can to an organization, but they have their own problems, right? Like just because a person from Google tells them invest 100K, and because we tell you that mobile apps are the next big thing, blah blah blah, this person is a business person, and they're like, I don't understand what you're saying, and I have other problems. Their problems could be something that the logistics are not working, or it is that they don't have resources in house. I felt that I'm a better fit there.
Uh-huh.
I can work better. So I quit Google and I joined, the Indian startup world. And I think for me, that's when my learning curve went up really high. Like it
Yeah,
was
absolutely.
so
I mean that I completely agree with you. The learning curve in startups is insane. I mean,
yeah,
there's no hand holding. You're just thrown in the deep end and you
yeah,
figure it out. And it
exactly.
was around that time, I think that around the same time, I think you made the leap to startups. I quit my first job a year and a half in, a
Hmm.
year and like 2, 3 months in, and then I jumped into the startup world as well. And
Yeah,
it was around that time that everyone was just like, okay, startups are the place to be. You need to like work in a startup, have a couple of
yeah.
years over there. But uh, do you think that still holds true now? Do you think that market is still like
Um,
that? I mean, it's
well,
hard to
I
say
think
because both of us have not been around for a while. I know it's been a couple
I
of
know,
years since
yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, whatever that I hear from my friends and folks back in India, I think right now, and startups, first of all, like, what is a startup? Like if we also just break it down, it's basically that you decide to start a business. This could be anything, right?
Right.
Not necessarily online. Tomorrow, if I decide that I don't want to work in a corporate anymore and I'm going to start my yoga studio, that's also a startup. It's just
Absolutely.
that with the if you add the digital part of it, then it becomes an internet startup, and then this whole the concepts of digital world come into play. So I think that is still happening, and it will continue to happen, especially in a country like India, where now even with the way mobile services are being introduced into the country, many people are now coming on. They're starting the journey straight online. There's the youth of India is more, let's say, empowered to do so in many ways. You don't really need to, let's say, even know English for that matter, because we are a big country. We have so many. different subcultures and
Yeah, that's true.
languages and
Mhm.
all sorts of differences. Like I know somebody who we both work with in Fresh Menu, and he has a startup in Kerala, and the entire app is built in Malayalam, the local language of that state, and it's about educating the underprivileged students of the state,
Oh,
like
wow.
kids who, yeah,
Is this
exactly.
Arun?
And Arun, yes,
Oh, wow. I
that's
need
Arun.
to talk to him about this. This is fascinating.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. And could you imagine this? Like, at let's say 5 years ago, the first thing that comes to your mind, because you're so like, in that zone, that a startup means that, okay, it's like this whole digital thing. It's, everything is like kind of an American company, or at least like, how the Silicon Valley in the US is. But it's not like that anymore. There are a lot of things happening in India which are happening at a very hyper local level.
Hmm.
People are doing things in regional languages. People are, starting out with like 2 3 friends doing things, in their
Out of
house.
their garage, out of their single room. Yeah, absolutely. You have.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's similar to what happened in Silicon Valley, but of course this is like in a different fabric. It's more regional. It's Indian. It has its Indian system of setting up the company. So I think it's still growing and it will continue to grow. And same I see in the Netherlands as well. I've been here now for 3 years, and initially like Netherlands is known for like some other kind of specialisms, right? Like they have trade, they have a lot of like Eindhoven is more on the technical side of things,
Right.
but now Amsterdam and Rotterdam they kind of have the startup culture. They have people who are coming out of Delft Technical University, and they're starting out with their own products, and these are like really products that maybe something like an app which helps you, I don't know the ratings of beer or wine in the
Uh-huh.
world,
Right.
something like that. Fun things already, like financial fintech is picking up, or it's e-commerce, or like services. So I think it will happen. It just becomes a norm for people who are business oriented to
Uh-huh.
have the same kind of things that 5 years ago we had to go through when we started to work with startups.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I mean, I'm sure both of us can agree. Like a lot of benefits with working in that environment. That's just the learning is incredible. Like, and you also get to
Yeah,
dabble in like. I mean, I was primarily in freshman. I was hired as a business analyst, but I
yeah,
was all over the place, and luckily so because I got to learn so much about your side of the business. And
yeah,
dabble in that as well because and I would not have got that exposure if I had not worked in a startup. If in a bigger organization
absolutely.
you're lined to that you say your main priority and that's it. You don't get to there's not much scope to explore outside of that. But
Absolutely, there are more silos in a big company, because
exactly.
also it's such a large organization. They kind of those silos also work for them because everybody's then contained and they do the best in that space. But it's what works for you, right? Like I still carry my startup mentality with me, even though I work for a large organization like Signify,
Uh-huh.
because when we were at Freshman, I remember that when we started out, simple things like looking at keywords and then seeing, oh yeah, a lot of people search for breakfast online,
Uh-huh.
and then telling the founder that, hey, this is what we see, and even if it's a niche market, let's try it. And because it's a startup, you can try these kind of things, right? You can make a sample product immediately, quickly call the chef, and Rashmi was like, yeah, okay, what's the best thing, what's most convenient, and then she added her business sense to it. Then it snowballs into a bigger thing, which becomes a revenue generating stream for the startup.
Oh yeah,
And in a big
absolutely.
organization, yeah, in a big organization, if you have an idea because you see, okay, I'm looking at some searches that are coming in and maybe this is something we can do, it has to go through a whole bureaucratic process, that first approvals, finance
Uh-huh.
approvals, business approvals,
Yeah.
legal approvals, etc.,
Oh, I
etc.
absolutely
So
missed that. Just being coming up with an idea and like straight away piloting it. That still it still sticks with me to think, wow, to go through that and be they have the ability to do that. No organization now, no, and rightly so. No organization of
yeah,
scale will have that ability to do because there's too many ramifications
too
of a
much
decision
risk.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, too much
Uh.
risk. But I still think you should not lose that touch, of coming up with ideas, because that's also what I learned at Google. Like my first 5 6 years were where I literally my growth, my foundation is in that culture, right? Like
Right.
think out of the box, come up with ideas, don't let things stop you from doing it. And of course you learn on the way and you make your mistakes, and it takes time, but it's somewhere so deeply ingrained and working in a startup that even now if there is some idea, I know that it won't work that fast, right? Like as it did with fresh menu, that okay, today you have an idea, tomorrow the product is out. And it's
Right.
also because the industry was quite agile, like food industry. You can cook food faster than you can make a product, like an end hardware product. So that
Yeah.
is of course different. But these ideas, they help steer conversation. So maybe your idea won't be adopted, or it won't be executed exactly, but it helps steering conversation within such a big company where otherwise silos kill creativity. So I think you should not let go of that, even if it's difficult. And that's where I feel that coming from a corporate, going to a startup and coming back to a corporate, I think it helps. It helps me, it helps the company that I work for in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. But on the downside, when I think back at my experience with startups working, the burnout rate, like
Hmm.
you can get burned out so like because it's everything's moving so fast. There's
Hmm.
and it's just s- I mean there used to be weeks where I would work just weekends. There was basically no weekend, that someone would
Yeah.
ping me and ask me, okay, let's put this together. We have that meeting with the investors on Monday, Tuesday. We need to have this one deck put together. And the burnout rate is so
Hmm.
high. And
Yeah.
that's one problem if you are, I would say, doing uh, if you get into a startup and you're doing well, and if they see that you have potential to contribute a lot, you're going to be utilized like to 120%.
Yeah.
It's
Definitely.
scary. Eh,
Yeah, definitely. The burnout part is like quite prevalent in like such small companies also, because there is no boundaries, right? Like, and the thing is that the business owner or the founder is so close to the problem that for them, and they're fully invested in it. So
You're fully
therefore, they
invested in it.
also,
A
yeah.
lot more than
And
a bigger
imagine
organization or your manager in your current organization would be, right? They
exactly.
have skin in the game.
Exactly. So imagine their state of mind, right? Like I worked for Baby OA before I joined Fresh Menu, which was a baby e-retail company,
Uh-huh.
and it was started by a couple, and they started it, and it became one of the biggest online retail companies for kids products. And after that, afterwards, I'm still friends with the founders, then, because we used to go to yoga together.
Uh-huh.
And she mentioned to me that you have no idea the amount of stress I had to go through. She was the founder, right? Co-founder.
Right.
So I was like, imagine their state of mind. It's even worse than the people who work there. But of course, the rewards part is different, right? Like when you own the company, you're invested because you also get rewarded if it works. But when you work in the company, you get only what you have been assigned to in terms of your salary. So I guess that's where the problem starts. You start feeling the burnout because you're like, okay, I'm putting in extra effort, I am ready to help you, but I'm at the end of the day only going to get that X fixed salary that I'm going to get. So what is it for me?
Yeah.
Apart from, of course, the learning experience. And
Yeah.
after your learning experience is saturated, then the burnout can happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And another thing that bothered me a lot, and just like my observations across the startups that I worked with, ethics are a little loose in that environment. When it comes to specifically, because I was very close to the data, right? My
Mm-hmm.
roles predominantly dealt with data wherever I went, and
Mm-hmm.
in that, I mean, I can only speak of my experience with the Indian startup culture, but in that
Mm-hmm.
environment, ethics were very loose and very like people took a lot of liberties and things that if you did in a big corporation would result in you getting fired or if not more, criminal cases per se. I know of people who've taken when they've left these organizations, these small startups, they've taken their data with them, whatever data they had about
Mm-hmm.
customers and all, they would have taken that with them and they've used it in their new job.
Organization.
And
Yeah.
that's such a blatant abuse of and somehow at that point it also fascinated me that not a lot of people cared too much. There were not a lot of blocks put in. Like it was so easy for someone to get that data and just walk out the door.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, it's like it has a lot. Such a problem is created because of a lot of things, right? Like, first is, of course, I think the person, individual ethics of the person. I think you would not do that, right? Because you somewhere know, yeah, maybe it's not nice for, from a model point of view, it's not nice for the consumer. They did not sign up to, be bombarded by whatever emailers or ads of some company that they don't even know of, because they didn't sign up for it. It's not good for the business, because you are kind of like, giving the red carpet to the competition. So I think, firstly, I feel that individual ethics are, of course, like the factor that plays a big role in this. But secondly, you're right that why doesn't the organization themselves safeguard their own data and their consumers from such a thing, from letting such a thing happen?
It was
um,
crazy.
yeah.
When I moved on from one startup to the other, the founder and the
Mm.
marketing head, we were having a meeting, and they asked me, "Do you have the data from the previous startup?" And like, we can use it. We can target some of those. And they could tell I was very uncomfortable with that conversation, and they never brought it up again. But it was so openly discussed, and it was so
Yeah.
like, openly requested. It just makes me think this is like seems like and these guys had worked in other startups apart from especially the marketing head and all. So it
Yeah.
made me think like, damn, this is like an open secret, or people are openly discussing, ripping off another
Yeah.
startup's data and then using it. It just seemed,
Well, yeah, I think that's also the reason why the privacy laws are becoming stricter, right? Because I think we have experience from Indian startups. Maybe it happens in other places as well. Like in Europe, GDPR is super strong because they
super
protect
strong.
the consumer. Yeah,
Yeah,
and they protect the consumers. And to be honest, I think GDPR, the European privacy laws are now being looked at as the gold standard. So even America, which is like extremely consumerism or capitalism is the peak in that country, they will send 5 emails if they have to get sales out of you, right? Like, it's everywhere. There's too much advertisement, etc.
right.
But they are adopting the GDPR laws for their own country as well, because of the nobody has fought for, nobody saw it coming. Let's just say that way, that things escalated so fast in the digital world that we have laws for, let's say, the offline world, right? Like, there are strict laws because they also probably went through problems, they learned from it, and they made laws to protect it. But
Right.
the online thing went so fast, and data became like super important. It's like the modern currency. And also, not just like 10 pieces of information, you can know everything about millions of people.
Hmm.
So it went so fast that nobody really knew what is the right thing to do. Everybody will have their own stance, right? Like, no, should be allowed, why is it not allowed, or maybe it should. Nobody really cared, but now it's coming because people realize that it's as important as your criminal laws in the offline world are. It is as important to protect somebody's identity and make them not sell their data, or like, let their data be taken away by some other organization because there is no law that governs it. So I think it will come. It's sad that
It
it
should
took,
come. It absolutely should. We
yeah.
require that. I mean, at the scale things are moving, they really, really need to bring this in.